everyone. So welcome to ISIS Thailand Public Forum today. So before we proceed to our special keynote speakers and discussions, so allow me to introduce my Dean of Political Science faculty to give a welcome remark, Dr. Pakorn Siripakon.
All right, welcome everyone to the seminar today. Here is my opening remarks. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's ISIS Public Forum series. It is truly inspiring to see such a diverse gathering of individuals committed to peace, justice, and a more secure future for our world and our region. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine is not only a European tragedy, it stands as one of the most consequential humanitarian and geopolitical crises of our time. It has uprooted millions, strained global humanitarian systems, and placed immense pressure on the international legal orders that upholds global stability. And although the conflict may feel geographically distant, its reverberations from energy and food insecurity to shifting military doctrines and intensifying information warfare are felt acutely here in East Asia. Today we are deeply honored to welcome an extraordinary guest, Ms. Oleksandra Matviichuk, a leading Ukrainian human rights defender and head of the Center for Civil Liberties, which was awarded the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize. Ms. Matviichuk brings not only legal and policy expertise, but also the moral authority that comes from first-hand experience on the front lines. Her insights offer irrepressible windows into the human realities of this war and the profound challenges confronting the international community. This forum encourages us to look beyond headlines and think critically about how the lessons of Ukraine resonate with East Asians' own dilemmas. ASEAN's various responses to the war, the ongoing crisis in Myanmar, intensifying strategic competition, and the intense dynamics across the Taiwan Straits, East China Sea, and South China Sea. They are not distant or abstract parallels. They are interconnected realities that will shape our collective future. Today is an opportunity to engage in the necessary and difficult conversation and to confront the central question: what does the defense of international norms in Ukraine mean for stability and security here in East Asia? Finally, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to the Frederick Naumann Foundation for their support in making this special event, and Ms. Matviichuk present here with us possible. I encourage all of you to participate actively in what promises to be an enlightening and meaningful discussion. Thank you and welcome to the Faculty of Political Science. ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you very much, Dr. Pakorn, as he reflected in his address. So today we have a special guest, Ms. Oleksandra Matviichuk. So as you are all aware, she is the head of the Center of Civil Liberties, which was awarded Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. So for their work on documenting war crimes committed during the war. So the Nobel Committee mentioned, because the organization was playing a pioneering role in holding guilty parties accountable for their crimes. So this was the first Nobel Prize awarded to a Ukrainian citizens or organizations. So therefore, with the assistance of FNS, ISIS Thailand is honored to host her here in our event before the year end. So without further ado, let me invite Ms. Matviichuk to the podium to give the keynote address. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for providing me a floor. It's a huge honor for me to address to this distinguished audience. I'm a human rights lawyer, and I'm applying the law to defend people and human dignities for many years, and I'm documenting war crimes in this war, which Russia has launched against Ukraine. When large-scale war started, we united our efforts with dozens of organizations from different regions. we built a national network of local documentators and covered the whole country, including the occupied territories. And working together, we jointly documented more than 91,000 episodes of war crimes. 91,000 is a huge amount, but still just a tip of iceberg, because Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia attempts to break people's resistance and occupy the country by the tool which I call the immense pain on civilian population. So we document not just violations of UN Charter, Geneva and Hague Conventions, we are documenting human pain. And while this war turns people into the numbers, what we are literally doing, we are returning people their names, because people are not numbers, and life of each person matters. Let me share with you one story from our database. This is a story of 10-year-old boy Ilya from Mariupol. When Russians tried to siege the city, they didn't allow the International Committee of Red Cross to open green corridors and to evacuate civilians. Hence, Ilya and his mother, like thousands and thousands of other people in the city, had to hide in the basements of their residential building from Russian shelling. They melted snow to have water, and they made fires to cook at least some food. But when supplies ran out, they were forced to go out, and suddenly they appeared in the center of Russian shelling. Ilya's mother was hit in her head, and the boy's legs were turned. With the last strength, his mother took her son to the friend apartment. It was no medical assistance, because prior to this, Russians deliberately destroyed maternity hospital and entire medical infrastructure in the city. So, in this friend apartment, they just lay down on a couch and they hugged each other. They were lying like this for several hours, and this 10-year-old boy told to my colleague how his mother died and got frozen right in his arms. There is no legitimization for such kinds of action. There is no legitimate reason to doing this. There is no military necessity in it. Russians have done such horrible things only because they could. I don't know how historians in future will call this historical period, but the world order, which is based on UN Charter and international law, is collapsing before our eyes. This system was built after the Second World War to prevent wars and mass violence, but now it's just stalling. It's reproducing ritualistic movements. Even my smartphone has an expiration date. This system has never been reformed. And now, unfortunately, it's easy to predict that such fires like wars and mass violence can emerge more and more often in different parts of the globe, because this international wiring is faulty and sparks are everywhere. And this is Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. This is not just a war between two states. I live in Kiev, and my native city is constantly being shelled, not just by Russian rockets, but also by Iranian drones. China helps Russia to avoid sanctions and to import technologies critical to warfare. North Korea sent to Russia more than 1 million artillery shells, and now they start to send their troops to Russia. All these regimes have something in common. They have the same idea what a human being is and how the new world order will look like. And that is why, for China, for Iran, for North Korea, Ukraine is not just a goal. Ukraine is a tool how to break the UN Charter and replace it with their own vision. And there is nothing new in their vision. This is a vision of the world of strongest. Putin attempts to convince that country with a strong military potential, veto power in UN Security Council, and nuclear weapon can do whatever they want. They can break UN Charter, dictate its rules to entire international community, and even forcibly changed internationally recognized borders. And if Putin succeeds, it will encourage other authoritarian leaders in different parts of the globe to do the same. And we can find ourselves in a world which will be dangerous for everyone without any exception, because the world of strongest, it's always a world of wars and mass violence. I work with people affected by this war directly. So let me assure you that people in Ukraine dream about peace. Because war is horrible. But peace doesn't come when country which was invaded stop resisting. That's not peace, that's occupation. And occupation is also horrible. Occupation is the same war, but just in another form. Occupation doesn't decrease human suffering. Occupation just makes human suffering invisible. And Russian occupation, it's not just changing one state flag to another state flag. Russian occupation means enforced disappearances, torture, rape, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. I know this because I'm documenting war crimes for 12 years already. People under Russian occupation, they live in gray zone. They have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their property, their lives, their children, their beloved ones. Let me illustrate it. This is a story of children's writer Volodymyr Vakulenko. He wrote beautiful stories for Ukrainian children. An entire generation of children brought up on his Deity's book. During Russian occupation, he disappeared. His family hoped to the last that he's alive, but like dozens of thousands of other Ukrainian civilians are just illegally kept in Russian captivity. But when Ukrainian army pushed Russian army from the Kharkiv region, we found mass grave in forest. And in this mass grave, we found dead bodies of civilians, men, women, children, with their hands tied under their back. And in a grave, unmarked grave, with the number 319, we found the dead body of this children's writer. He was tortured to death. I know his family personally. It was very difficult for them to accept the result of identification. And you can ask me, why Russians killed children's writer? The answer is simple. Because they could. Because this is what Russian occupation is about. This war has genocidal character. Putin openly says, there is no Ukrainian nation, there is no Ukrainian language, there is no Ukrainian culture. For 12 years, we have been documenting how these words converted in horrible practice in occupied territories, where Russians physically exterminate active local people in local communities. Mayors, journalists, children writers, teachers, priests, environmentalists, musicians, how they ban Ukrainian language and culture, how they destroyed and robbed Ukrainian cultural heritage. and how they take Ukrainian children. They took more than 20,000 Ukrainian children and separated them with their families and illegally transferred them to Russia. They put these 20,000 Ukrainian children in Russian re-education camps. They told them, "You are not Ukrainian, you are Russian children. Your families, your parents refused from you, and you will be adopted by Russian families who will bring you up as Russians." So, to be clear, Ukrainians want peace, not occupation. Because if Russia occupied Ukraine, we will cease to exist. This is a very difficult time for people in Ukraine, and I think that describing this current situation, I have to tell you some words of hope. Because based on our experience, we know that if you can't rely on the legal instruments or international system of peace and security, you can still rely on people. We get used to thinking through the categories of states and interstate organizations, but ordinary people have a much greater power than they can even imagine. Ordinary people can change history. I was in Kiev when Russian troops tried to circle my city. I refused to evacuate, and with a part of my team, we continued to do our work on the ground. It was time when not just Putin, but all international partners were confident that Ukraine has no potential to resist to such enormous opposing power, because Russia was the 11th country in the world when we speak about economy. Russia has nuclear weapon. Russia has strong military potential, 140 million of population, veto power in UN Security Council to block any decision, which Russia wants to block. And Russia has oil and gas, which means a lot of money. So I witnessed how international organizations evacuated their personnel. They left us alone. I remembered how we celebrate every morning during the first weeks like a victory, because we managed to stand just one more night. And I remember how ordinary people start to do extraordinary things, because ordinary people remained. And it were ordinary people who helped to survive under artillery's fire. It were ordinary people who took people out from the ruined cities. It were ordinary people who broke through the encirclement to provide humanitarian aid, and suddenly it became obvious when ordinary people fighting for their freedom and human dignity, they are stronger than even the second army in the world. I think this is a very important lessons learned from Ukrainian situation. And I would never wish anyone to go through our experience, because once again, war is horrible. War probably is the most horrible thing which just can happen in the human life. But this dramatic time provides people in Ukraine the possibility to express the best in us, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, to make a difficult but right choices, to take burden of responsibility, and to help each other. Because only when we help in each other, when people risking their lives for others whom they never met before, only in that moment we are acutely aware what does it mean to be human. I interviewed professor on philosophy, scientist Igor Kozlovsky, who spent 700 days in Russian captivity. Before that, I interviewed hundreds of people, men and women, and they told me horrible stories. They told me how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes. Their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled. They were electrically shocked through their genitalia. One woman told me how her eye was dragged out with a spoon. So it was little that could surprise me. But Professor Igor Kozlovsky, he mentioned a tale which was insignificant for the evidence base, but this detail impressed me. He described how he was kept in solitary confinement, in tiny cell in the basement, with no window, no fresh air, no light. This cell was purely ventilated. It was difficult for him even to breathe there. Sewage flows on the dirty floor, and through the opening of the sewage, rats were crawling down. And this well-known professor in my country told me how he gave lectures on philosophy to these rats just in order to hear a sound of human voice. And legally, Igor Kozlovsky is a victim because he was abducted, illegally detained, and kept in inhuman conditions. He was tortured by Russians so severely that he had to learn how to walk again. But he told me that all his experience, it's not a reason for him to treat himself as a victim, because the basis of our foundation is dignity, not victimhood, and dignity is action. Dignity is not just make us to feel responsible for everything which is going on. Dignity, it's also mean that we have to do the right things to change situation for better. We are not hostages of the circumstances. We are participants of this historical process, and dignity provides us courage and strength to fight even in unbearable conditions. And I'm here to say that despite everything, the story of Ukraine, it's a life-affirming story, because these dramatic times raise hope. Because when freedom is denied, it becomes powerfully to break out through the every concrete individuals. And I'm here to say that our future is not just unclear, our future is also not pre-written. This means that we still have a chance to fight for future, for our children to live without freedom of violence and have a long-term perspective. And I'm here to say that we still have a hope, because hope, it's not confidence that everything will be fine. Hope, it's a deep understanding that all our efforts have a huge meaning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oleksandra. So it was, you agree with me, it's kind of touching statement that you have heard, and what you can see is the humanitarian work is still needed, but not very easy to implement. So it requires a strong political will, among stakeholders, not only international organizations or states, but civil societies and people to help construct this kind of humanitarian protections to the suffered. So her story reminds us that such humanitarian crisis could also happen anywhere, anytime, and we have witnessed some of these kind of humanitarian crises around the world, especially in our region. Especially if I would mention about Myanmar crisis that has been lingering for many years. So we have witnessed this civil war and conflict in our neighbors, and not seeing who will win the war, right? But what's certain is people in Myanmar have been suffering tremendously. So besides Ms. Oleksandra, who will continue with us, in our conversations afterwards. Let me introduce our other discussants to continue the conversations and then, to reflect our theme. First, let me introduce Mr. Pierre Linné, Deputy Head of Missions of the Swedish Embassy. The second one, Dr. Natanan Kunamat, Associate Professor in the Department of International Relations in our faculties. Her expertise is on European affairs as well, so perhaps, this will be the connections that we could link into our regions and the European affairs. So, and then the last one, Dr. Panupatiet Tiang, Assistant Professor and Director of Nelson Mandela Centers and Deputy Dean of Political Science Department. Besides his academic work or hat, he is also appointed as Thailand representative on ASEAN Intergovernmental Commissions on Human Rights. So we have a good combination, of expertise from both regions. So today we will try to address not only what has been going on in the European continent, but also draw some of the lesson experience that we can learn to look into, what's happening in East Asia, especially in ASEAN and, the Northeast Asian region as well. So each panelist will have around 8 minutes to give his or her remarks, and then we will follow by further discussion. So let me start with Pierre, Mr. Linné. Perhaps you could probably tell us on behalf of the EU and, Swedish positions, particularly we saw last year that Sweden and Finland, joined NATO in March 2022. How do you see the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine in terms of changing security landscape in the European continent? Please.
Thank you very much, and first of all, thank you to the Institute and to Chulalongkorn for inviting me to this panel, and thank you very much to Ms. Matviichuk for your presentation, which I think was tremendously moving and brought up a lot of emotions, both anger and sadness in it, but also, as you pointed out, hope very much. So thank you for that, but in particular also the important work that you do in Ukraine related to accountability, because this is, of course, such an important issue that we gather evidence of the Russian war crimes and that we hold Russia responsible for its actions, and the work that you're doing in this regard is tremendously important. And from the Swedish perspective, we are a strong advocate also for an international tribunal to hold Russia accountable for its war of aggression, because the war of aggression is a crime in itself in international law, and this is tremendously important that Russia doesn't get away with this. So from a Swedish perspective, and I think that goes for many European countries, supporting Ukraine in whatever way we can is our number one, number two, number three foreign policy priority. So we try to do what we can diplomatically, politically, but also through a lot of material support, including 20, in Sweden's case, 20 military packages of a value of $9.6 billion, which is a significant contribution for a country with 10 million people. But if you look at the European contribution, we're talking about almost 190 billion euros in total. So if you count all EU member states and the EU. So this is, I think, very clear that Europe is doing its part to try the best we can to support Ukraine. I should say also that the war of aggression has significantly altered Sweden's security policy, and seeking membership in NATO is an evidence of that. And that also underscores something else, that NATO is not an aggressive alliance, it's a defensive alliance, because without the war in Ukraine, Sweden and probably Finland would not have been members of the alliance at this point in time. So this is a direct result of the Russian assault on the international rules-based order and the European security architecture. And as pointed out before, this is also why every country in the world should care about the conflict in Europe. It's not a European problem, it's an international problem because we have all benefited from the rules-based international order. And the very basic idea that every country, every sovereign country in the world, regardless if they are big or small, should have the right to make their own security policy decisions. This is the idea that Sweden and Europe stands behind, and this should be contrasted to the Russian idea of might is right, that Russia should have a right to dictate for countries in its neighborhood what it can do and not do. So this is, if you like, the ideological battle in this as well. And that's important wherever you are. This is important for Thailand, this is important for Southeast Asia, this is important for this region. Well, in relation to NATO, I would also like to say that I was asked before to touch a little bit upon the complementarity between NATO and the EU. So there is no contradiction at all between our strong commitment to NATO and our strong commitment to EU. It's complementary organizations, and if you look at the overlap of the organizations, you would see that most EU member states are members of NATO as well. NATO is about collective defense, and it's very, very important with that deterrence that NATO can offer, and that's why we're seeking membership in NATO. But EU is about everything else, and we have taken a lot of steps also recently within the EU to build, to make Europe take a greater responsibility for its own security as well. We have, for example, launched a large number of defense cooperation initiatives, a lot of acronyms, but just to mention a few: the Permanent Structure Cooperation, PESCO, which is a capability project to strengthen our readiness and capabilities. We have the European Defence Fund, which is about spending money to strengthen the defence industrial base. We have military mobility to increase the mobility to be able to move troops throughout Europe quicker to the Eastern Front, of course, because that's where that's where the security threat lies, unfortunately. And also the European Peace Facility, which has been also very instrumental in supporting Ukraine, supporting crisis management with different types of capabilities. So we are doing a lot in the EU, but it's all complementary to what is done in NATO. So I think that's just some reflections on from a Swedish and European perspective why this is important. And finally, I may say as well that our security is very much interlinked, European security and security in the Indo-Pacific, and there are so many examples of this. Look at alliances, for example. US is an important security partner to many countries in this region, including Thailand, and it's a very important security partner to Europe. We, as pointed out before, we have some direct involvement of North Korea in the conflict in the war in Ukraine, war of aggression. That's another example. But you also see it in terms of supply chains and economic security. How obviously these are very much affected, including defense industrial cooperation and trade in dual-use goods across the region. So there are a lot of linkages beyond the defense and the importance of the UN Charter and the sovereignty of the respect for sovereignty. There are a lot of direct links between the two. So I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Per. That's a good ending. So we can perhaps nicely move to the connection between the war in Ukraine and what's happening in the Indo-Pacific region. So next, let us invite Dr. Nathanan. So Nathanan is a European expert in Asia. So perhaps you are good persons to make some kind of the observations, what is going on in Ukraine to our regions. What have we seen, whether ASEAN positions on Russia's invasions of Ukraine, or what the war can give us, a sense of some security flashpoint in the regions that are now a bit getting hotter and warmer, right? I mean, like in East China Sea, on the Taiwan issue, or even South China Sea, for example. So I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you, Ajahn Prongpisut, for the introduction. Well, when we talk about linking Russia aggression in Ukraine to East Asia, I think we need to divide it into two parts. The first one is Northeast Asia, and the second one is Southeast Asia, which is totally different perception and totally different security complex. The first one, the Northeast Asia region has a higher degree of conflict formation. You know from the news, there were two front conflicts, Korean Peninsula and the Taiwan Straits. So they have a higher degree of conflict formation than Southeast Asia. And second one, the concept of macro securitization also higher in the Northeast Asia. What is macro securitization? Macro securitization means that the two regions which are not necessarily geographically adjacent, like Northeast Asia and Europe, they share a common concern of Russian-Ukraine war, in which we don't have this in Southeast Asia, and I will elaborate later. In this regard, Northeast Asia see Russia-Ukraine issues as that threat perception, as European counterparts shared. And so you see how Taiwan, how Japan, how South Korea securitize war in Ukraine as security of Asia. Japan talk a lot about having East Asian NATO. The latest, the newest Prime Minister of Japan, Sanae Takaishi, she even launched some comments on China, which forbade Chinese tourists. This incentivized Chinese tourists to come to Japan. So these fears of aggression of China, North Korea already highly shown in the region. And as Oleksandra just said, that given that North Korean soldiers were in actual battlefield in Kursk region last year themselves, so this is quite worrying the Northeast Asian state, democratic states. So moving to China, what are they thinking about, right? Because we cannot say only Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea perception of threat. Because of, I would say that what the West alliance doing now, especially the sanctions, economic sanctions, and other kind of sanctions, we have to continue doing this because it's not only exhausting Russia, but it's going to prevent China to annex Taiwan as well, because China, following the sanction from the West closely and try to speculate what would happen if they did cross the straits and occupy Taiwan. So the sanction nowadays is very comprehensive. At first, you know that there were a lot of trade sanctions, monetary sanctions, asset seizure, the asset that in Europe over $300 billion was seized. And this cost Russia more to wage war in Ukraine. However, you know that in the second phase, that Russia still get away with it because Russia's oil and gas were still purchased by China, for example, India, for example, and Russia could still buy semiconductor through Turkey and UAE channels. So EU and Britain start to launch another sanction or secondary sanctions, in which these sanctions going to launch on the company in the third countries, like in the case of China, UAE, that helping Russia. But still, you still have a problem within the EU because you know that several EU members were still want to buy Russian and oil, right? So it's a kind of, the solidarity was still needed in the Western side. And if we move to Southeast Asia, as I said at the beginning, it's so different because, but before that, we need to understand that it's very complicated because we always use Southeast Asia interchangeably with the word ASEAN, right? But actually, it's so different because we have to talk like Southeast Asian state first, and then ASEAN as an organization later. Because ASEAN tried to work on it, on ASEAN solidarity, but it's not achieved yet, right? For the Southeast Asian state, they did not share Russia's aggression on Ukraine as their threat perception, except Singapore. Singapore is the only country that launched sanctions against Russia. They envision how they, as a small state, could be in danger, and they strongly believe in rule-based international orders. And moving to China is the existential threat for us, Southeast Asia. Only the Philippines think that, I would say. Philippines try to balance against China. But the remaining Southeast Asian states, China has not been securitized as a threat for us. And even though they know that Russia never-ending aggression could not be possible without economic and strategic cushion from China, but they still think that, oh, it's not concern us. From the voting of the UN General Assembly resolutions, when Russia annexed 4 Ukrainian provinces, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam abstained, right? They did not condemn the annexation of Russia. And from the poll in 2023 by Ipsos, Thailand comes first in avoiding Russia-Ukrainian conflict for 60%, followed by Malaysia, 56%, and Indonesia, 45%. So this kind of threat perception that could be happen to them as a small state is not persist in this region. And when talking ASEAN as an organization or regionalism or open regionalism, we know that ASEAN won't put Russia and Ukraine in aggressor or victim axis, even though they sympathize the Ukrainian and what the Ukrainian face, but they wouldn't do it in word or officially. And ASEAN tried to omnidistance itself equally with Russia, Ukraine, and the West. In both US-ASEAN summit in the first year of the special operation, 2022, and ASEAN-EU summit, both President Biden and European Commission failed to encourage ASEAN to put the word to condemn Russia in the final document. So this is quite upsetting for the West. And why is that? Before I end the first round, because there's factors behind ASEAN quiet diplomacy, and I think you know, right? The first one is ASEAN Way. Well, actually, ASEAN Way is supposed to use within ASEAN 10 or 11 countries, right? The principle of non-interference in each other's domestic affairs and regional resilience. But it seems that ASEAN extended to be like the non-interference in any affairs of the world, something like that. And then the second thing is why ASEAN keep quiet? Because after the West sanctioned Russia since the Crimea annexation 10 years ago, Russia used a new strategy called Pivot to Asia, in which Russia find alternative markets in ASEAN, in Southeast Asian states, and they were very successful. And it's a kind of defeating each other in terms of economically. So this is a successful Russia policy. And the third one, ASEAN very quiet in the war because they have a certain kind of distrust of the US and the West, of trying to legitimize the war in Ukraine as a means to isolate China, in which they don't want to isolate China because they have a good relationships in terms of trade and political relations. So that's why ASEAN were quite hesitant in this Russia-Ukraine conflict. So I would like to end the first round here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nathanan. So we could probably have seen more dynamic in East Asian continent between Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, especially Southeast Asia. We see the power of hedging, right? I mean, like these kind of things that we just want to show that we don't want to choose side, and we want to perhaps utilize certain powers to balance against the others. So basically, that complicates a lot of things in Southeast Asia when we want to address certain issues, especially humanitarian assistance. For example, in Myanmar crisis, for example. So perhaps that's a good space where Dr. Panupat could fill in as a human rights and humanitarian expert. So you have a chance to work with the within the policy circle within Asia, Thailand. So how can you reflect on this humanitarian crisis in Ukraine and Southeast Asia, especially in the case of Myanmar? So what ASEAN may learn, from the work from the European counterpart, especially from her organization's works in this front.
Thank you so much, Ajahn Pongpisut, for having me as well. And it's a real honor to join the panel discussion this morning in response to Ms. Matviichuk's remarks, and I would like to be joined by the two colleagues. First of all, I would like to salute to Oleksandra and your organization for all the work that you have been doing. I think it's inspiring, and it's really important work to document war crimes and also crimes against humanity and all kinds of atrocities that committed against human beings. I think that it's always has to be at the forefront that we are doing all the work here to protect people. I mean, that should be at the non-negotiable principles that we should be going forward in this world that we are living. For me, I want to say that when we think about the war in Ukraine, we should not see it simply as a European security crisis. It is a conflict that really helps us reflect on the global humanitarian and also geopolitics as well as the normative implications. My reflection will be focused on 5 points only. And then I would try to draw comparisons between what we discussed in the context of Ukraine and what we can draw on from the experience in Southeast Asia. So the first one, it's on the grassroots and community-led humanitarian responses. I think that what is really important that we learned from the context of Ukraine response was how quickly local communities, municipality, faith groups, volunteer, they mobilize. And often, it much faster than the formal system. We see that, like ordinary people, they open homes, they run community shelters, become the very backbone of humanitarian actions. And in contrast, if you look into Southeast Asia, right, and particularly in the Myanmar border, we see some similar capacities. We see the ethnic health organizations, we see some of the faith-based network, we see migrant-led groups, and so on. But the real difference is that their work remain to a large extent informal, unrecognized, and most importantly, under resources. Why I'm saying this, that this point is so important, because if you look into the experience of Ukraine and draw it back to what we are doing here, what we need is 3 things. Number 1 is to empower local responder. Ukraine shows that community action works best when government treat local responder as partners, not liabilities. And in the conflict zones in Myanmar as well, we have children also hiding in the forest. We see when they have to fled airstrike. These local networks are the front line, or the lifeline of all these things. So how are we going to be able to integrate this group into the humanitarian planning because of they are the one that do the actual work. This is the first point. Second thing, fast and flexible funding. When we think about the context of Ukraine and Europe made micro grants available within days. And here, aid is very slow, very centralized, and now even shrinking as we've seen in the context of international aid cut. So quick disbursement of fund to border groups and so on, I think this is something that's really important. Because of that means that it can translate into food, shelters, and medical support. The reason why this must be the core, because if we're not doing that fast enough, then the only survival channel for people is to go into the scam compound. And as we've seen already at the moment. And because of that, how are we going to be able to if we want to crack down on the scam, this is also what we need to really do. Third, how are we going to be able to protect the volunteers? Because of most of the time, the actions that are taken by people is by these volunteers who do it by their heart. But in other regions, these responders, they are operating very much in the gray zones, and they're not recognized at all, and they are put their own life at risk. So formal recognitions and safe channel for them to do the work, it's so crucial, and I think that's something we need to draw lessons from Ukraine. So that's my first point, 3 sub-points. The second one, which is really important now, is to look into the ethical and political disparities in the refugee treatment. I think that when we look into the context of Ukraine, we see how the warm welcomes were given to the Ukrainians. I mean, that was something that we've seen. But when it comes to the situations of what happened in our regions, it become a matter of whose suffering counts and who's is framed as security issues. We see a lot of blockade, right? And Jonathan had mentioned already non-interference. Non-interference should not be used to mean non-indifference. Because when it comes to the work that we are actually doing, it's really important that the work that we focus must be on protection. And that means that it needs to depend on human need, not nationalities. So no false returns, no differential treatments. These are things that we need to move forward. Well, Thailand now tries to allow refugee camp residents to work. I think that's promising steps. But how are we going to make this a larger program for a number of people? And at the same time, for ASEAN as well, to have the whole comprehensive framework is something yet to be seen. And I think this goes into the question of the responsibility sharing, which is missing completely within ASEAN. There is a conversation that we've been talking, because if you look into the context of Europe, it mobilized as one. In the context of ASEAN, it relies and reacts individually. Everyone takes jibes in their own ways and their own things, not a united positions. Even though we have 5-point consensus, yes. But 5-point consensus mean what? It's mean in the papers, no operationalizations that are on the ground yet. It's still not seeing it. It's been there for 4 years. We're repeating the same talking point over and over again. So as a result, how are we going to make that operationalized on the ground is something that we really need to learn. And that conceptions of responsibility sharing is important, and Thailand should be at the forefront of that. Because we are the one that are experiencing all these different impacts at the frontline. Humanitarian needs must also be above politics. When we're talking about helping people, it's beyond simply talking about people. It's talking about taking sides. It is a moral responsibility that we need to take. And that's in the context of Ukraine. I think it's already clear that humanitarian actions cannot be held hostage by political sensitivities and so on and so forth. And because of that, it's the reframing of the issues. The third point I want to mention is on the information warfare, the technologies and humanitarian space. I think now we see something that's very interesting that also coming in. When we are documenting war crimes, in the case of Ukraine, the open source intelligence, the satellite imagery, digital tools, these are things that can help verify atrocities and actually to protect civilians. And I think that this is something we need to take it seriously in the context of our region as well. Because of technology has become a tool that enable accountabilities. We've seen that in the context of Myanmar, for example, that even though there are blackout, local communities still use photo, video, satellite image to document strikes and so on. But the thing was that it's needed trainings and cross-border cooperation so that this tool can be strengthened for justice and so on. But again, it's really important to actually point out that there are also caveats there, right? Because of the debate right now is that if the internet access is there, the ones that take advantage of this are also the scam operations that are located at the borders. So how we strike a balance between this? I think this is a key question that we really have to think. So what it means is that if it doesn't work in the digital way, at least the radio network or the offline capacity early warning system, those kind of things, how we can create and take advantage of those to actually allow people to know about what is coming. I mean, that's something to think about. And last but not least, on this part about informations, is on disinformations. I think it's something we really need to talk about because of, in many contexts, and also in Myanmar context that we see is that when some of the organizations are branded as being a threat to the states or a threat to whatever they are trying to brand, terrorists and so on, it actually fuel fear and create blockade for the humanitarian aid deliveries to actually going in. So this is something that we really have to address to debunk these misinformation so that it would not affect the humanitarian actions on the ground. I won't have time to go on one of the point on the economic pressure yet, but there was one point that I really have to bring up before I close my first round here. It's on geopolitics. I only did 3 just now. My 4th point and my 5th point, I leave it to the Q&A maybe. The 5th point is the geopolitical context between Ukraine and Myanmar. I just want to dive into that and implication for ASEAN as a whole. I think what I see is that in the context of Europe and Ukraine, we see unities, we see unison on Ukraine. ASEAN, by contrast, very divided. And this has reduced, as I said, to 5-point consensus, which is a symbolic position for me, and left ASEAN unable to really press for the protection of civilians and humanitarian corridor or even other thing else. Even without full consensus, a core group of countries could still lead on certain humanitarian coordinations. And I think this is something that we have to really think more carefully on how we're going to overcome this. Second one, we need to recognize the role of neighboring countries, how neighbor become the key part and the first point of refuge. So this is how we can serve, let's say Thailand can serve as a humanitarian hub or practical hub for humanitarian support and later as a credible convener for dialogues. This role needs to be put back in positions, and then that's to really elevate the role of Thailand. And last but not least, I think that Ukraine really mobilized major powers. We see Myanmar is really caught up in the competing interests. China has its own stake, Russia armed support, we see Western sanctions, we see ASEAN's cautions, and these inhibit the so-called the coherent it's a problem of international response as well in this particular context. So what it is really important is that if we look into the context of Thailand that I'm going to speak of, is that the relationship between how Thailand can play a part in using its relationship with Washington, with China, with other member states to at least depoliticize humanitarian measures and then to provide support. So I think that's a key part. And then finally, just one quick message I want to give in my closings. Always humanity first. I think the most important thing at the end of the day is always human at core. If we want to save human being, that should be the whole thing. And as Oleksandra already mentioned, dignity is actions. I mean, that's a key part that we really need. Second, the role local actors, first responder on the ground, support them, recognize them, make them be part of, sit at the table. And last but not least, the regional leadership that will be needed from some of the core countries, especially Thailand, in the context of Thailand, in the context of Southeast Asia, as we can see and reflected from Europe. I think this is something that is really important. And last but not least, I also see the role of border facilitators, how to make things flexible, and so on. And this is something that could really make a difference to experience of people. And that's something that for me, I learned from the context of Ukraine. And this is something that I think we can draw a comparative lessons that can bring us forward. I end it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Champanupat. Thank you for your structured and very good point in many dimensions of our comparison between the Ukraine case and in Myanmar, especially in Southeast Asia. So we have sometimes delve into certain topics that left over from the first round of discussion. So perhaps I would start with Oleksandra. We have heard you and many of our panelists talking about the role of the regional organizations or even international organizations to protect, humanitarian, dimensions of these suffered, right? Both in Ukraine and Ajahn Panupat was talking about, ASEAN, the role of ASEAN. So some of the institutions, are not effective enough. Some kind of like reform of broken institution may be needed, right? So the UN Security Council still have Russia's veto. You have an advocate, I've heard that a special tribunal for crime of aggression. So realistically, how do we build a new architecture for justice that does not rely on solely on the very institutions that might have this kind of obstacle? What role can other countries, non-Western powers, or the other middle power can play in providing alternative legal framework in this, in addressing humanitarian crisis?
Thank you very much for this question. It's not easy to answer, and I'm glad that there are students in the room, because I think that someone who finds the answer to this question, how the new world of architecture must look like to provide security and human rights defense to all people, regardless where they live, this someone will definitely receive a Nobel Peace Prize, for sure. So let me start to strongly support my colleague from Nelson Mandela Center that yes, when we speak about humanitarian crisis, first and foremost, we have to rely on the local actors. They know better what has to be done, they understand needs, they're much more quicker and much more flexible, because when we faced with a large-scale war, it was very weird situation that international humanitarian organizations, they allocated a lot of money to work in Ukraine, but the vast majority of work was done by local actors who have nothing from this money. It was them who doing literally the whole work, while this big international humanitarian organization try to organize everything in accordance to their own procedure, conflict of interest, tenders, security policies, and people can't wait for the water for 3 months. They need this water now. And this is the main lessons learned. And I still don't understand why international donors who try to help Ukraine, they invest their money not in local actors, but in this on this huge international humanitarian organizations who left the big budget to their own staff, not to the work on the country. So I strongly support this idea that we underestimate the efforts of local actors, and they are drivers of positive change on the ground in every country, in every part of the globe. But let me return to your very difficult question, how the new world architecture has to look like. And it's not easy to answer, as I mentioned, but, because we have to find an answer to a lot of questions. Let me just name several of them. First, we call this system United Nations, but this is not United Nations. A lot of countries in General Assembly, they don't represent their people. They represent the political elite who captured power in their own countries. So the question is how to make architecture to provide a voice for people. Second question, we call the United Nations International Organization, but it's not international, it's interstate organization. And what is it different? Each state in United Nations try to promote their own national interest, and nothing wrong with it. It's okay to promote and try to balance, but the question is how we can create real international organization which generate interest of humanity, not competition of national interest, but something which will represent this international interest for people at all, regardless who they are, their religion, the color of the skin, their ethnicity, their ideology, their social position, and so on and so forth. And third, the question is how to build this architecture based on human rights and freedom. Because we are losing freedom. 80% of people in the globe live in non-free or partially free societies. They have sometimes a lot of limitation of freedoms. And UN system is based on UN Charter, which acknowledge the role of human rights and freedom, at least on the paper. But there is no guarantee that the new system which will emerge will be based on human security, on freedom, and such kind of things. So the question is how to protect these values for us as for people from our own human pragmatic point of view, because it's about our security, it's about our dignity, it's about our families, it's about our development, and how to make these values to be not just written on a paper, but introduced on the practice. So once again, please, dear students, think about these issues. Our generation failed to find the proper answer. We rely on you. It will be your responsibility, and I will be glad to welcome a new Nobel Peace Prize laureate on the ceremony who will propose such a vision.
Thank you very much. Anyone want to answer these questions? Or within ASEAN, how we can rebuild ASEAN to be a more reliable and effective mechanism for addressing these humanitarian systems?
Well, maybe Ajahn Panupat on humanitarian ASEAN, but I just a quick on ASEAN. I think yes, ASEAN got 5 points consensus on the case of Myanmar, but I think in the case of Ukraine, ASEAN need to have certain like ground rules or some documents that show that ASEAN is very respect the rule-based international society, like the respect of territorial integrity, the protection of small states, the anti-war against humanity, war crime, ethnic cleansing, something like that, in the proper paper.
I think that your question is, it's really like if I can do it, I can redesign the whole ASEAN system or even the international system, right? But I think one of the first and foremost, the most important thing is that for humanitarian works to be done, it doesn't mean that, we need to redesign structure or we redesign architectures. It's just that you accept that this is a situation that's happening and we are willing to do it. It actually requires political will rather than, the redesign of the structure. I mean, for me, that's the key part. If we have the political will, and there's always a saying that, right, if there is a will, there's a way. So because of there's a political will to begin with, then there is a way. And that means that it doesn't have to be, in the way that we have to depend on structure. Because if we keep thinking about restructuring, it takes forever. We talk about UN reform for how many years now, and it's still the same, right? But if the system cannot be reformed at this moment, but that shouldn't hamper the way that we are moving forward. So in that sense, what I found is so important is that how we're going to make it more flexible using the existing or leveraging the existing mechanisms. At least in ASEAN, we see that we have already the AHA Center, right, which is the one that focuses on humanitarian actions. Of course, I mean, it may decide to respond to disasters. But in the context of AHA Center, there was also one term saying that it's human-induced disasters. If we reinterpret that in the way that it encompasses conflict and war, perhaps that's the room for us to actually do a lot of things already based on what is existing there, right? So we are not creating a new mechanisms. And I think that's a key one. And then while we are talking about that, of course, in parallel, then we can do thinking about reform. Now, that's at the ASEAN level. But if we look at the global level, the same, right? I think one of the key things is that, like if you see the global conflict right now, we have Gaza, we have Ukraine, we have Myanmar. The international spotlight is also really important because of when attention is focused Or sometimes like there's a feeling, right? Because of Ukraine is far away, that's why it cannot be feel. Or Myanmar is so far away, it cannot be feel. Those kind of things, it's also important. It's not a matter of feeling, but it's a matter of how you can bring that attention of what is the suffering of the people on the ground to the rest of the world at the same standard. I mean, that is the way that we really allow the whole United Nations to come together. Again, I mean, and then pressuring those who are the perpetrators. I think that to hold the perpetrator accountable, there are many different things and different ways of actually doing it, right? And I think that the most powerful thing, if we can't do it now, documenting it and wait for the time when it's right, and then that we're going to be able to hold the perpetrator accountable. That's why I started off saluting what Oleksandra has been doing with the organizations, because of the most powerful stories that we hear or seen is those documentation and the stories of Iya, for example, that we heard just now. Those are the stories of life that we needed and need to be collected. So whether or not the system will be whatever, we cannot dismiss the documentation, because that's the way to keep the story alive, no matter what. So I end it there for now.
Thank you. Maybe just a quick comment. I mean, first of all, multilateralism by definition is very difficult. We have 200 members in the UN, more or less. So it will always be difficult, and there will be, unfortunately, authoritarian states there. There will be democracies there. There will be more sort of hybrid states there. So by definition, it's difficult. Of course, the UN needs to reform, and you point at some things that has not worked very well recently, like the Security Council, but we should also remember that the UN is more than the Security Council. There are many organizations that are also doing important work, if it's World Food Program or if it's any of the specialized organizations and so on as well. So this is important to keep in mind, and also important to keep in mind when we talk about the world order is that there are certain countries as well that would like to change it, but not necessarily into a vision that we have, at least in the democratic world. So this is something that we have to be very mindful of as well, that yes, reform, but be careful not to end up with an alternative world order that is even worse of what we have today. And finally, of course, if you look at just with the link between Europe and ASEAN, the European Union is probably one of the most successful organizations in the history of the world. So there is, I think, a lot of things to learn from it as well. How successful it has been in over time integrating Europe, coming from the Second World War and the big tragedy then. So yes, it's not perfect. Yes, sometimes we have difficulties getting our act together. We are 27 member states, but still, if you look at it from a historical perspective, it is a tremendously important and successful organization.
Okay, thank you, Pierre. And that's good that you were mentioning about that. And actually, I reflect back to your point of the fact that the nature of NATO is defensive, right? But then part of the world, the invasion of Ukraine is actually viewed as Russia's defensive measure as well against the expansion of NATO. So what do you think, or other panelists things that make this view possible? And spreads across various segments of the populations, not only in Southeast Asia that Ajahn Nathanan was mentioning briefly, but in other parts of the world, especially in the global south.
Thank you for this question. I would provide several facts which is important when we speak about relation NATO in Ukraine. In 2014, Ukraine was a neutral country. Neutrality was officially written in our constitution. Our politicians, for decades after when we restore our independence, they perform multivectoral policy. So we were neutral, multivectoral, and even more, if you open any sociological polls, people in Ukraine don't think about NATO at all. So nobody wants to join NATO in Ukraine in 2014. But it's didn't help us because Russia invaded. Russia occupied Crimea in 2014 and part of the eastern regions of Ukraine. Then we approved 2 peace agreements with Russia because we have zero chance to release people and these territories. And how Russia uses these 8 years, Russia built a powerful military base in new occupied Ukrainian territories. Russia prepared the economy for the possible wave of sanctions. Russia produced artillery shells. Russia forcibly recruited Ukrainian men from occupied territories to Russian army. And Russia started large-scale war 3 years ago. So this is our experience. So no surprise that now people in Ukraine want to join NATO. Because we understood that this neutral status can't help you when your neighbor, who are stronger, decided to eat you. Like there is a very famous Russian fairy tale when the wolf told to the goat that you are guilty only because you are guilty only because I'm hungry. So this is what happened. We are in this Russian fairy tale. Russia is hungry and that's why we are guilty. Not because we won't join NATO. Nobody think about NATO in 2014. But Ukraine now officially changed our constitution. Yes, now we want to join to NATO because we need this collective defense against such powerful and aggressive neighbor. So it's very understandable. There is no geopolitical tricks. It's very understandable from the human level. And now when you open social polls, you will see that people in Ukraine want to join NATO because we want to have this collective defense. It's very difficult to resist to such enormous opposing power alone. It's obvious.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for reminding us of the facts. I think the facts get lost more and more often when we talk about the war in Ukraine, but also on a more, in a more broader sense, of course. And unfortunately, Russia is good at one thing, and that is hybrid warfare. Cyber attacks, but also disinformation, and this is a completely Russian narrative that unfortunately is picked up by some around the world, but it has nothing to do with the facts. And I mentioned before also as an example why Sweden, and I think also Finland, I see my Finnish colleague over there, so if I may, I think, why did we join NATO? Because of the Russian aggression. A direct response to this, and that shows that it's about collective defense, and that our support to Ukraine is not only about being on the right side of history, which is also very important, of course, and to do what's morally right, but it's also completely linked to our national security as well. Because if the Russians get away with this, who is next? This is very clear. And finally, I mean, if you look at how countries do join NATO or do join the European Union, it's by their own decision and their own national processes. And contrast that to how Russia has forced itself for the last century up on Europe and up on Central Asia and up on many other places of the world. The Baltic states were invaded and incorporated into the Soviet Union, and we have seen this again and again. So there is a contrast. It goes back to this idea again that Russia thinks that they are big and they have the right to dominate smaller countries around them, and this is something that is very relevant for the rest of the world. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with our two colleagues that before 2022-24 February, Sweden, Finland, Ukraine didn't have an idea of decisively want to join NATO until the aggression start, and then it's a kind of NATO membership is a kind of certain protection, but Russia keep giving the narrative since the Cold War that NATO want to expand since the East and West Germany reunification, and then when the Baltic states join NATO, so it's a kind of Russian excuses of those protecting their Russian-speaking world, and then try to eat up the remaining nation states, right? I would like to add on, because you just mentioned about hybrid warfare, about you somehow, and then I would like to relate a bit to Thailand, because now we are facing hybrid warfare from Cambodia. I mean, can I? Okay, because, I think that it is very exciting for us as well. No, not exciting, serious, because we never have war for a long time, and then this kind of 5-day shooting is like, it's raised a question, because we heard about Ukraine lessons a lot of how they react to the fake news from Russia, how to counter the hybrid warfares. So it is quite undisputable that we are a larger country. We are a medium-sized state, and Cambodia is a small state, and we are greater in terms military. We got even Gripen from Sweden. We got F-16, something like that. We are greater in terms of military. But the way we counter fake news, hybrid warfare, or the way that they say that we use chemical weapons on them, I think there will still have to be improved. This kind of tactics and the way of framing strategic alliance, because even we are greater in size, but we not sure whether international community are on our side. Compare what the Cambodian did. So I would like to raise this point. And then again, in this case, as Thailand as a medium-sized state, after we halt or we cancel the peace agreement with Cambodia after our Thai soldiers were injured by the landmines that installed by the Cambodian. We are pressured by the major powers, like what Ukraine faced, like we are pressured by the US to come back to the peace talk, because otherwise they're going to evoke the tariff measures on us. We are pressured by Japan to reopen the Thai-Cambodian border. So this is how we see the limitations of the medium-sized state and small state Thailand that we can draw on from the Ukraine lesson.
Probably one related questions that, we are speaking of the international legal orders. If Russia is allowed to retain territory seized by force, what precedents it could create to other parts of the world, especially in this part of the world, East Asia, the Taiwan issues, South China Sea issues. If, when we see like international law would survive in East Asia, when it's a little bit shaky, if you look into the war in Ukraine, when the war has been lingering for quite some time, and would that work here to prevent, other aggressors or, big power to do whatever they want to do here as well?
I can that quickly. So I think that, when we think about major power, right, we see them sometimes as a role model as well. And particularly if they sit somewhere and doing things, particularly those in P5. I think that the role of presidents is really important. Not the president, okay, presidents. Why is it so important? Because this president, once it's set, it becomes the standard that others can use as a license to do things in their way. And particularly if those actions are taken by major power, it even more, image or things that smaller, medium-sized countries can say and say, oh, see, a major power can do it, why can't I? Once the wrong president is set to do away with the international rule-based order, that means that now every other countries can say and point fingers to major power, they can do it, why can't I? And those kind of things, I think it's dangerous. Because of if we are talking about us being, can one country invade another sovereign nations just because of the whatever justifications, there will always be justifications. Because of there can be any other justifications and keep coming. You can go. You can have a long list of that, talking point ready to justify, right? So at the end of the day, what does it mean to talk about international legal order or rule-based order, right? So I think that major power has to be responsible. And I think that to say that is easy, right? Like for me to say that, oh, you major power have to be responsible. But that pressure needs to come from small and middle countries. And we voice out to the rest of the world that whatever you are doing, when it trickle down and seen by people in the public, you should have show that kind of precedence. I'm not talking simply just about Russia in this case. I also say about the US as well. And we can see that how tariff has been used as a tool to also, just simply as a magic wand to punish and do things and those kind of things, which is not right. So in that sense, I feel like that role of presidents, it's really important. How we're not going to set a wrong precedents so that others going to mimic or try to follow.
You want to address this question?
Yes, I mean, just to completely agree what you just said, the rules and laws doesn't mean anything if we don't follow them, and if there is no consequences and accountability for those that break the rules. So there must be a cost, and the cost can be tribunal. The cost can be sanctions. The cost can be, in the Ukraine case, of course, supporting Ukraine as much as we can. But there must be a cost when otherwise we cannot uphold, of course, the rules-based international order. And the linkages and examples you made to this region are very clear and obvious, I think, in this regard.
Well, the reason in the first round that I stressed the importance of shared threat perception and macro securitization a lot because of this, because we don't have it here at all. But we are in threat. I mean, the South China Sea, right? Like, we know that, for example, I mean, let's talk about nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence, Russian having nuclear. So this is one main reason that the European counterpart, American and NATO, cannot send military personnel directly to help Ukraine because this nuclear deterrence. So this is a thing that China calculated as well, because China got nuclear. China know that, okay, there's a kind of insensitive for us if we want to invade Taiwan or want to get the whole of Spratly Islands of the South China Sea. But as a small state in Southeast Asia, we don't share it. We just think that, okay, Ukraine is Ukraine. It's not going to expand to us. But let me share this. It's like 10 years ago when Russia annexed Crimea, that time even Japan still think that it's not my threat because it's far. Crimea is far from Japan. Japan condemned Russia, but Japan is still buying Russian oil and gas at that time. And then when Russian escalation, I just talked to Oleksandra, it's like Crimea is appetizer, right? They got appetizer. And then now they go to second course, third course meal, and then they come to Donbass, and then Japan start to frighten that, oh my God. It could be us. I mean, the threat tension, the Korean Peninsula, it could be us. So now the East Asian, that I said, the East Asian security complex already shared this threat perception. But for us, the small state, I mean, Vietnam keep abstain every voting in the UN because they were close with Russia since the Soviet Union time. But they didn't know that actually they got a kind of, they are the direct disputant with China in the case of South China Sea and Spratly Island. China could violate their rights, their territorial integrity, their small state integrity. So that's why I think we have to talk a lot about this and create a sense of common shared threat perception that as a very small state, ASEAN state, anything could happen to us. Yeah.
So great. We have around 20 minutes something, so probably it's time for us to let our audiences, make a conversations with our panelists. Any questions that you want? Please raise your hand and identify yourself. Kun Kasit.
In 1992, I was the Thai ambassador to both Moscow and Kiev. And in that sense, I still retain the attachment, and definitely very sentimental indeed for what has transpired for the past few years. And at this point in time, the Ukrainians are suffering the most. Winter is coming. Heating system and electricity will not be working because the plants have been destroyed to a large extent. But at the same time, and I would put my comment into 3 questions to all the panelists. First is that at this very moment, the American and the Russian delegations are finalizing the draft peace program. And my question to all the panelists is, what do you think? Second, the fact that the Ukrainian people have been suffering all along and will suffer more if war continues. What are the sentiments and the rational thought of the political leadership of Ukraine at this moment, with the rising defection of some of the cabinet ministers and so on? Would the leadership come to terms with the reality on the battlefield and take the suffering of the Ukrainian people as the utmost priority and move towards ceasefire and peacemaking? And third, my last question. I always have the feeling that there is an entrenched mindset in Western Europe that the Russian people are perpetual enemies and perpetual threat to the whole of the Western European civilization. Would there be a change of mindset and looking at the Russian people as partners and part and parcel of the Western European civilization and thinking about partnership, collaboration? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your questions. I will try briefly touch all these 3 questions. First is about peace talks. When Trump was just a candidate in presidential election, he promised that he will end this war in 24 hours. So this has already been the longest 24 hours in the human history. He also said that he wants to stop this war because he cares about people who are dying. We also care about people who are dying. So I think it's a very good intent to stop this war. The problem is, and now I will make link between first and the second question, that unfortunately Putin doesn't want peace. Putin wants to achieve his historical goal. And political leadership of my country are in line with reality, and President Zelensky proposed ceasefire several times, unconditional ceasefire, just stop killing, and then we'll open the path for diplomatic conversation. But Putin rejected ceasefire for an obvious reason, because Putin started large-scale war not because he wanted to occupy just another piece of Ukrainian land. It's very naive to think that he lost hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers just to occupy Avdiivka or Pokrovsk. It's very tiny Ukrainian cities and villages. People in Thailand, people in Russia can't even find these tiny Ukrainian cities in the map. So it's not a war for Avdiivka or Bakhmut. Putin started large-scale war because he wanted to occupy and destroy the whole Ukraine and move further. He sees Ukraine as a bridge to Europe. He is not mad, he is very pragmatic, but his logic is historical. He dreams about his legacy. He wants to forcibly restore Russian Empire. This is idea which drives not just Putin, but unfortunately, vast majority of Russian people, and this will be the link to the third question. Because Russia is empire. Empire has a center, but has no borders. Empire always tries to expand. This is the nature of empire. And empire has people with imperial thinking. The problem is that the vast majority of Russian people, they literally think that they have a legitimate right to invade another countries, to kill people there, to erode their identity, to steal their children, and to re-educate them forcibly as Russians. And I personally work with other brave Russian human rights colleagues. When the war started in 2014, we organized a lot of joint initiatives, and we intensify our cooperation. We still save these bridges between Ukrainian human rights society and Russian human rights society during the large-scale war. Because, as I mentioned, we have dozens of thousands illegally detained Ukrainian civilians in Russian prison, and according to international law, Russia has no right to detain civilians, but Russia did in such enormous scope. So for us, the only way how to help them to identify where they are, if it's possible to send some medicine, some parcels, to get information, what's going on with them to their families. It's only possible because of the work of Russia, of our brave Russian human rights colleagues. But they are marginal minority in Russian society because this is imperial nation which have never been punished for crimes which they committed during Soviet time. And even now, Russia committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in other countries of the world. So they start to believe they can do whatever they want because unpunished evil grows. So to conclude, when I spoke with my Russian human rights colleagues, probably you know that all human rights organizations and independent media are banned in Russia. So now part of my colleagues have to leave their native country. Part of my colleagues are in jail in Russia, and part of them are still doing their work under the constant threat to be jailed. That's why I tell that I acknowledge their bravery and very grateful. And this is a good opportunity to highlight that I'm very grateful to my Russian human rights colleagues who are doing their work in situation when the law doesn't work at all. And when I ask them, you are helping us so much to protect people and human dignity, how I can help you? What me, being Ukrainian, can do for you, my dear Russian human rights colleagues? And they always responded, if you want to help us, please be successful. Just be successful. Because only success of Ukraine will provide a chance for better future for our country as well.
Any other questions?
Yeah, my question is about, to the panelists, how do you see European security in the long term? You see that when the war is over, I think personally that the war will not end in a ceasefire or in a peace agreement, but it will be a frozen conflict. But that is another matter. But when the war is over, whenever that is going to be, Russia is still going to be there. 145 million people, still going to be a very powerful state. It is especially this backyard. It is not only Ukraine. It is also Scandinavia is also vulnerable, and especially the Baltic states are vulnerable. So how do you see that? We see that European Union, which is mentioned here as an important institution, doesn't have any common military, and NATO. The United States is losing interest in NATO because of East Asia, because of the rise of China, and because the US is pinned down in the Middle East also, has many problems around the world, and has less capability to defend Europe. So it seems to me that no matter what we think about Russia, we need to live with Russia. And so how can you, and Russia was interested in joining NATO at some point, but was not invited. I'm not saying it should, but it was not invited, and it is not a member of the EU, but it is going to be there. So what are we going to do to provide security in Europe given the situation? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. And just to add on the previous question as well, very briefly, that I think it's a very clear message from everyone in Europe that there can be no peace deal or ceasefire without Ukraine. So this is very important to consider when analyzing whatever outcome of the American and Russian talks. And of course, we also encourage and appreciate very much the American engagement on the issue. And also to say that when it comes to the possible entrenched mindset about the Russian people, I don't think that is a fair way to portray the European, how Europeans see Russia. If you look at the 1990s, when Russia had a lot of problems, but there were some hopes for a more democratic Russia. We engaged a lot with Russia, and if you take the Baltic region, for example, Baltic Sea region, for example, we tried to engage Russia on a lot of important cooperation around environmental sustainability, to take care of our joint Baltic Sea. That's just one example. We have engaged with Russia in the Arctic as well, with the Arctic Council, and many, many other areas as well. But of course, if you look at the last century, with the invasion of Finland, with the annexation of the Baltic states, with the interference in Hungarian internal affairs, with the interference of Czechoslovakia in 1968. This is, of course, not building trust. So this is the problem, that there is very little credibility when Russia says that it wants to negotiate, because actions matter on this. Yes, Russia is going to be there, of course. In the short run, we need to build deterrence. We need to make sure that whatever settlement in the end we will have in Ukraine, we would have to unfortunately prepare for the worst. That means another war, another act of aggression from Russia, and only deterrence can avoid that. So that would be my short-term answer to that question. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, please. Can you identify yourself as well?
Hi, I'm a reporter from Taiwan. I would like to ask, as we know the rising tension between China and Japan over Taiwan's remarks, I would like to ask all the panels, particularly Ms. Oleksandra. I know you were in Taipei a few days ago, and then I would like to ask, what's your assessment, all the panels, of the likelihood of China's possible invasion, or let's say Taiwan Strait conflict, and what role the global partners or international communities should play in preventing escalation? Thank you.
Perhaps I'll collect another questions, Kuntasi, and our students. Okay, 3 questions, and then we'll Kuntasi first.
Thank you to come back again, but I would like to disagree a bit with my Swedish friend. I think one has to make a distinction between the behavior of the Soviet Union and the new Russian Federation. And with the demise and the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, it should have been a new beginning of a partnership across Europe. But that has not been the case with the continued existence of NATO organization. And the lack of development assistance to the then democratic Russia under the leadership of President Yeltsin. One must not certain happenings and factors that did occur during the course of the 1990s until President Putin came into power and the whole scenario changed. Just to remind that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for Ms. Matviichuk regarding the latest Ukraine peace plan. So this morning I read in the news about the peace plan which was reportedly proposed by Donald Trump, which one of them includes that the U.S. is going to be a security guarantor for Ukraine. But in exchange for that, Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy, and in particular the G8. So I would like to ask if this is like worth a trade-off and will lead to like a durable peace in Ukraine, as well as is it like the best way out to stop the killing in Ukraine? Thank you.
Next question.
Thank you. I would like to ask Ms. Alexander that there are a lot of Ukrainian people under Russian occupied territory, and there have been reports that there have been Ukrainian people that were abducted into Russia. So I imagine it's really hard to try to help or access those people. So as outsiders, how can we try and help, especially when it's so hard to even know where they are and what's happening?
Thank you. The ladies.
Yes, my name is Margaret McMillian. I'm a former American diplomat, and I was working in Washington in the period when there was a change of government in Russia, including some time on the 7th floor of the State Department. And I would like to echo what the Swedish deputy head of mission said, that in this period, there was a great effort to help Russia as it was emerging and as there was a change in government. And also in the Clinton administration, something that was established was the Partnership for Peace, which included Russia. And when I was working in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research on African Affairs, I attended meetings at NATO in which Russia, Finland, Sweden, and other countries who were not part of NATO participated. as members of the Partnership for Peace so we could work together on African issues. So I think it's very important to remember that the US and other members of the West were very hopeful at this time to develop a new relationship with Russia. And even when I worked as ambassador to Rwanda in 2001 to 2004, I was able to work very closely with my Russian colleague on a number of issues related to the Democratic Republic of Congo and the end of the transition period in Rwanda after the 1994 genocide. So I think a lot of what has happened more recently reflects changes in the government in Russia and not a view that Russia was an enemy. In fact, I think there was a real desire to develop a very positive and friendly relationship with Russia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have 3 questions: Taiwan issue, latest development of the peace plan that include Russia and G8, and the help of the abducted people. So, wants to
probably I will start and we will continue. Thank you for your questions. I have I will try to provide brief answers and several remarks. First, I know from our own experience that people start to understand that the war is going on only when the bombs falls on their head. But the war has not just military, but other dimensions: value dimension, cultural dimension, economic dimension, trade dimension, cyber dimension, informational dimension. And I'm sorry to say, but from this perspective, a lot of wars has already crossed the national borders, because what we see for current moment, and let me use this opportunity to share lessons learned from Ukrainian perspective. The informational dimension is very crucial, because first, this dimension has no limitation in the borders at all, and second, this is dimension where the fight is going on for your hearts and minds. And the truth is first victim in the war, because when countries have a lot of power, like Russia, they can build the powerful informational infrastructure across the globe. They can hire billions of trolls in social network, and they start to ruin our connection with reality, especially for countries who are far from our part of the globe. Russia tried to justify this illegal invasion and their deliberate destruction of residential buildings, schools, churches, museums, and hospitals as their defense of Russian-speaking people. I'm sorry, I'm Russian-speaking people by myself. I don't need such kind of defense at all. My first language was Russian. It's inheritance of Soviet Union. I was born in Soviet Union. Russia tries to show and to pretend that this illegal kidnapping of dozens of thousands of Ukrainian children, which was a basis for International Criminal Court to open a criminal case and issued arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin, that this is not kidnapping, this is evacuation. And for sure, for people who spend a lot of time in the digital reality, they are very vulnerable in such external manipulation. They start to lose their ability to make distinction between lie and truth. And yes, this is a huge problem, because there is no easy solution how we will protect ourselves in informational warfare of the war. Because how we see the world is not just our own problem, it has a great impact to our own decisions and our own actions. So Russia tried to decrease the level of support of Ukraine, or at least to make people feel we are neutral, using this informational warfare which has no limitation in national borders. So it's something which has to be studied by all countries, because it's not just Ukrainian problem. I think that we have a right to criticize European partners for their behavior to Russia during the early 19th. And I will tell you why. Because probably European partners were too hopeful. And they closed their eyes what Russia was doing towards Russian society. And our Russian human rights colleagues, they told for decades that countries that grossly violate human rights provide threats not just for their own citizens, but to security and peace in general. And the first ethnic cleansing, which now Russia do in occupied territories, was started in the war in Chechnya during the Yeltsin time. And during the Second Chechen War, the first destruction to the ground of 500,000 city Grozny in Chechnya was happened without any proper reaction from the civilized world. So no surprise that just in some years, Russia did it the same in Aleppo in Syria by bombs. And after the several years, they did it in Mariupol in Ukraine by bombs. Because once again, unpunished evil grows. So I have also something to add to criticize this policy. About peace plan, I told once again, and will repeat more and more, that people in Ukraine dream about peace. And we want peace, not occupation. Occupation doesn't decrease human suffering. Occupation just makes human suffering invisible, because nobody cares what Russia is doing in occupied territories. In 2014, when we first started to document war crime there, I sent numerous reports to UN, to Council of Europe, to OSCE. We tried to communicate it with governments from different parts of the globe. Nobody was interested. So that's why we want peace, but not occupation. And that's why Ukrainian leadership proposed unconditional ceasefire. Okay, at least let's stop. And we are open to diplomatic solution, but we can't afford ourselves wishful thinking. Because let me remind you that United States was our guarantor. We signed in 19th Budapest Memorandum. It was international document when Ukraine voluntarily gave up the third nuclear arsenal in the world. And in exchange, we got guarantees from Russia, from United States, and from Great Britain that if something violates Ukrainian territorial integrity, this country will be guarantor. And that's why you can easily give up of your nuclear power because you have this guarantor. And when 2014 came, we found that nobody is going to fight for our territorial integrity. So it's a good lessons learned. We can't afford ourselves wishful thinking anymore because we are dying. Because the price of mistakes are too high for Ukraine. And for sure, I think we can't find a path to sustainable peace without Ukraine on the table. So it's not okay to design this plan without Ukraine, just with aggressor. And second, it's not okay that this plan has no human dimension at all. All these months, we heard a lot about natural minerals, Russia's territorial claims, geopolitical interests, even about Putin's vision about Ukrainian history, but we don't hear about people. We still have no idea what will be with more than 20,000 illegally deported Ukrainian children to Russia. What will be with dozens of thousands illegally detained civilians who die in Russian prison? What will be with people who live under occupation in general? We speak about millions. We can't leave them alone. We want to know what will be with them, because it's not just discussion about territories. For us, it's discussion about our neighbors, our relatives, our families, our people, so we must return human dimension into peace negotiation. Without peace, human dimension, we will never find a path to sustainable peace. And thank you for your question, how you can help. It's a very important question to ask, because you can. I do believe that people have power, and you can't be neutral to human suffering. I think neutrality is an illusion, because having into account the huge difference between Russia and Ukraine, even look into the map, if you are staying neutral, it means that you help Russia to occupy Ukraine, that's all. There is no neutrality in such situation. And that is why I will ask you, please help us to make our voice heard, to distribute more information about what Russia is doing in occupied territories. We have in occupied territories 1,600,000 Ukrainian children. Russia started militarization of these children from the kindergarten. For example, their parents are forced to provide their children regularly to Russian camps where children live in barracks, lining up, marching, and kiss Russian flag, and learn how to use weapons. Russia is preparing a new generation of Putin soldiers from these 1,600,000 Ukrainian children. Also, these children are going through the process of erosion of their identity, because Ukrainian language and culture totally prohibit in occupied territories. And these children started in Russian textbook. And in Russian textbook, Ukraine does not exist at all as a state. And also, Russians, they brought up these children in an atmosphere of unquestionable obedience. It's not our type of culture. And this, not just human rights problem, this is a threat. Because Russia is preparing this 1,600,000 Ukrainian children not just for war with Ukraine. In the age of 14, these children will receive Russian passport. In the age of 18, these children will be forcibly recruited to Russian army, which means that they will go to fight and to die in any country which Russia decides them to go to fight and to die. So please tell about this. When we're losing the truth, we need your voices. It's simple, but it's very important.
All right, thank you. So, we are not having any time, so we're running out of time. So probably like that comes to an end. So I would like to thank Ms. Oleksandra Matviichuk very much for being here. Your remarks very insightful, inspirational, and touching. And you see like a lot of students here, and they are our seed of hope in the future for safeguarding the peace in the international community. So, and also thank all the panelists for joining us today, and like your sharing insight and your experience with us is very meaningful. And then please give a big round of applause to all the panelists today, and thank you FNS for supporting this event again, and thank you everyone for coming such an early morning. Thank you. So I hope you enjoy your